Welcome everyone to WFA UNCUT, where the takes are hot and the bods are hotter. This is me, Noah Underhill, as you know, the former WFA commissioner, and we are here on WFA2 on YouTube, and we are going to be talking today about the WFA landscape post-draft that just happened this past weekend as of time of recording. It was a great show. I wasn't there live for the first time ever, but I really got to enjoy the work of Colin and Nolan and Derek and Zach as they went through the draft picks. Great work from the behind-the-scenes crew, getting the show to where it is right now. And we did not have these graphics as of the past couple years, so this was a really great thing to have. And we've just been improving as the years have gone on, and I have really enjoyed watching our growth. It was a great event, and I think we all enjoyed watching it. I will be recapping that today, but first a little bit about what this show is going to be. This is my podcast. I'll be recording it out of my own personal studio. I just got word that I will be up for an award for some podcasts that I did for a podcasting class, so I figured I'm an award-winning podcast host. I might as well use that for the league that I am a part of. So we will be going ahead and using this sporadically. I will probably be posting the videos that I work on this channel as well, just to keep it away from the main content on the channel so we can have different spaces for each thing. I think that's how YouTube works. They like it if you have more shorter content to put it on a different channel. So that's what I'm going to be trying out. If it doesn't work, then we can go back over to the main channel. But we're going to be trying to build up WFA2. We have this channel. We might as well be using it. So we'll be getting into the rosters after the draft. We'll be going through a couple of the divisions this time around. We'll probably do two parts to this episode. But the first one we're going to be dealing with is some of the WFA's most interesting pickups. As we've been looking at, I'll be going through the draft picks. I'll be going through some free agent things if it makes sense to what the story of this team is going to be. And I think you'll really see a lot of my opinions that I haven't been able to say publicly, besides the spot that I did with DB on his written work. So you're going to hear it straight from the horse's mouth. And let's just go right into the first division, which is going to be the WFA East division. So who better to start off with than the WFA East and the team that drafted first overall in the Season 10 draft? I'm, of course, talking about the Charleston Federals. Now, the Federals, they were able to trade for this pick. They were big into wheeling and dealing this offseason, and they were able to get the number 1 and number 4 overall picks in trades. So it was very interesting to see that happen, and when that trade came in right before the draft, I thought it was a great move for Charleston. They were obviously going to be trying to target a wide receiver. I think a lot of people had that pick, and they were able to jump Pottsville, who were definitely going to be looking at wide receiver, and I think everybody knew that going in. If it wasn't going to be wide receiver for them, it was going to be a linebacker for Pottsville. So I think that either way, Charleston just felt it coming. I'm not in the rumor mill, so I don't know as much anymore. But I feel like Charleston knew ahead of time, so they were able to jump Pottsville. A little bit of an insider thing right there. Good work out of Nolan to stay vigilant, to know what's going on, and able to take what they needed. So the first player off the board was Joe Pierce, which was pretty interesting. I don't know if that's what I would have done if I was selecting just who I thought was the best player. Now, obviously, there is some connection with the Pierce family, so it was very likely that if either Pottsville or Charleston was, or even Santa Fe for that matter, if they were drafting and they had a wide receiver that they were going to go after, it was going to be Joe Pierce. But he did finish 5th in receiving yards. He did finish 4th in receiving average. And he was tied for 6th in touchdowns, but only 3 behind leader. So this was a guy that had a lot of work, and he was in a pretty good offense as well, so he got a lot of shine. So I think this was a good pick. I don't think it was bad by any means. So I think that they got a good player with that pick. And like I was going to say on my notes, 5 picks, 5 starters for this team. So they come back with their second pick, and they draft Beef Supreme, who played corner for the Fargo Freeze. He had 4 interceptions, which is very solid, 6th in the Rise League. And he was also 5th in deflections with 6. So this was a guy that was very good at looking for the ball and getting it. Now, he's going to be moving to strong safety, which I don't think I agree with. I think this was a interesting move. Is he a startable player? Yes. But he does come in at 6'1", 210. That is playable at strong safety. But again, this is a position he's never played before. And to throw him in there on day one, as he is a gold player, we'll see how it works. But the biggest problem I have with it is that Edward Diggs was on the board. That is a strong safety who had 8 interceptions. He was the league leader. And there is really no reason why he shouldn't have gone in that spot instead of Beef Supreme. They're both user players, and the only thing that Beef Supreme had over him was being a primary player, which gives you that extra ability, as we know. But I still think that Edward Diggs should have gone in that spot at number 4. But we will hope that Beef Supreme can contribute for the squad. They also drafted John Smith, Luke Lee. I think the punter, it was a little early to take. That was a pick that was made in round 2. You didn't have to do that. If that was a guy that you really wanted, that's okay. But they did also draft an offensive lineman in the 3rd round. So either way, you're taking a guy that you can draft in any position. I would have. It's semantics, but I would have taken the offensive lineman first because you can get the best one available. However, they did make that move, and I think that that's another quality pick. We've seen what Tony Gunk can do and other highly rated punters. They aren't always the best, but you can consistently think that they are going to show up for you. So they were also able to come back and get John Smith, who I think was the best pass rusher from the Rise League. He wasn't ranked that way on the draft board, but he did lead the league in sacks. And he also was at number 4 in tackles for loss, which was still best among defensive ends. But they did get him in a great position, and he will be starting on day 1 as well. I think he'll pair up really well with Colleen Pierce, Pitt Elder, and Axel Raven at defensive end. Jackie Nimble is in there as well. So I think all of those people will be able to contribute, but John Smith should be starting day 1. I think we can see that coming from a mile away. So what do we feel about the Federals? They don't have a center yet, but Joey Swoll will help them improve their offensive line, and I assume they pick one up in free agency. They did need to improve that O-line, so getting him does that. Andy Todd, he had 5 picks. Beef Supreme had 4 in the Rise League, so hopefully Beef Supreme is able to replace Andy Todd, which is the guy that they traded away, one of those first-round picks. And we got to cut down on the Roush interceptions. Now, how do you do that? You give him more weapons to work with. You give him a better offensive line. And Joe Pierce was that guy for them. Jeff Bainfield was the number 2 that was coming into the season. And he is a silver. But if you can give him a silver as a 3 receiver instead of a silver as a 2, I think you can get a lot out of this. Now, hopefully, with Roush regressing to silver, they'll be able to rely on Trey Tucker a bit more and have him be their number 1 option in the offense. But for now, we'll just have to look from the sidelines and see what Charleston is able to do. I think that this team got better. They should be able to improve in the offense from where they were a year ago, trying to rely on Coulter hands. But I do think that the team that's had the 11th total offense is going to improve that. I think that the total defense, I think it'll stay around in that top 10 range, but I do think that Charleston improved coming out of this offseason. So next up is the expansion Dayton Aviators. And I think of the expansion teams, everybody thinks that this was the one that did the best. They came out swinging. They got gold players, and they're hoping to use them to their advantage here. So the first pick was Jaron Kiss. He'll be the wide receiver 2 for Charleston day 1, it seems like. He was in the middle of that Boise offense and really did a lot to separate himself from Yayo and Chavez. Even though Yayo was their big play target and the touchdown machine, Jaron Kiss, I think, did better because he had 16 yards per reception to Yayo's 13. He just didn't have the touchdowns to go along with it. So we'll see where that comes up at the second level and see what Harrison Miller is able to do with him, because that is now his new quarterback. They were also able to add Samuel Rodriguez at defensive end. He's going to be a day 1 starter, and I think that was a very important thing that they needed to get. They needed to have at least another silver on that defensive line, and they get it right there with Rodriguez. Then they also pick up Ormi Armas, who's going to be playing a lot on day 1. He's probably going to be their starting nickelback, or at the very least getting a lot of time there. So I think the picks that Dayton made were really good. I think that they did a good job of using what picks they had, because, of course, if you're an expansion team, you either get all the picks or you get none of the picks, depending on how you use your trading assets. So they didn't have a ton of picks going into this, so they got what they could out of what they had. They had a second, a third, and a fifth, and I think that they got 3 players that will be starting for them and will improve this team. Now, where do they stand in terms of the league? Well, we're getting Nick Cricks at running back. If you remember, he was the fullback for the Vegas Venom, and because this rule still hasn't been adjusted, he will be the starting gold running back for Dayton. You know I hate that, but Nick Cricks is one of my players that I put in to fill up space. So I really like this guy. The idea is he starts as an Australian rugby player, and so now he's coming over into the U.S. So we'll see if he's able to produce at running back. I would assume he will, even though he has fullback attributes like speed and whatnot. I think he'll still be able to perform at a high level. And then we also have some other pieces like Harrison Miller, as I previously mentioned, and Fitz. Now, of course, I'm going to give you some stats from these guys because these are your 2 star players. And this is in 7 games, of course. But Fitz is coming off a season with 520 yards, 2 touchdowns, 11.6 yards per reception. That's under what he should be doing. And he was in Green Bay last season. He was kind of lost in the shuffle. All of those guys were just stealing plays from each other and didn't really make a huge run one way or the other. So I think that as a number 1 receiver, once again, even though he is regressing, I think he could still give them at least one more good year. And then you also have a guy like Harrison Miller. Now, his QBR was 80. He was only completing 66% of his passes, 11 touchdowns, 13 interceptions on a pretty solid Des Moines Corn Kings team. So it's really just yet to be seen. And especially with the playbooks the way they are, you really have to hope that your players can produce based on what their talent level is. What they do have is a very solid secondary. This is a lot of veteran presence. You got Doug Barney and DeAndre Williams in here. You have Bo Bacon and Egbe Eswola. These are all players that are definitely starter quality, if not star quality. And I think that these guys are going to be the guys that are going to pull this team along. They also have Mordecai Fist, who should bring some pass rushing threats. And with Kiss and Jefferson Fitzgerald, I think that's a good enough receiving core, along with Calvin Yab and Ronnie Shanahan. I think that they are stacked to the gills. I think that they'll be just fine, and this is a great start for an expansion team. Now, if their veterans can produce the way they're supposed to, that'll be the key, but we'll just have to see on that. But I really do have high grades on the Dayton Aviators offseason. Next up is the Pottsville Maroons, and before I even go into their draft class, I think you're going to hear this from me anytime you hear me talk about Pottsville. Pottsville will always have the same outlook. It'll be, this is a solid roster, but I'm not convinced it's championship worthy, and I'll tell you more about that later, but just keep that in mind as we go through. That's what I feel like this team is going to be until something changes. but we'll just have to see. If you look at the Pottsville Maroons from last season, 5-2, they had a pretty great scoring. They scored 10 more points than their opponents, but their offense was a little bit stale. Now that's probably due to the fact that their starting running back wasn't there, and Martin Radosevic, he'll be back in full force this season. And they were also relying on Anthony Jackson, who really underperformed as a wide receiver one. So what did they do to help out this offense? They got rid of Jackson and added Junior Samples. Now, Junior Samples is that guy. I think that Junior Samples should and is the number one receiver coming out of the Rise League. 30 yards per reception, third in yards, and second in touchdowns. Yes, it was in the Thunder Bay offense, but I really think that this guy is head and shoulders above anybody else. And if Von Jones was a better quarterback, you would have seen that even more, if you can even imagine that. So Gary Nicholson, in WFA terms, should be a better quarterback than what Von Jones was able to give last season. Gary has been a Pro Bowler at some points. This was a down year for him, of course, with a QBR of 76, 9 touchdowns, 14 picks. He wasn't very good for this Pottsville offense, but that's probably because he was being relied on so much. Even though Steven Sanders, I'll give him his credit, he did have a decent year, they still needed to get more out of their offense. So we're going to have to see if Gary can make a bounce-back season. If not, Scout McTerry is standing in the wings. McTerry versus Gary, I think, could be a very fun QB battle if things get a little bit shaky, but we'll just have to see on that one. They also drafted Phil Von Pop, who I think was a good pick. I think they needed to make that pick. However, there were much better players on the board. Once again, Edward Diggs was available. They also had Rinrin Bradshaw on the board. Smokey McRae was on the board. Cody Morris was on the board. And I think all those players were better than Phil Von Pop. However, I do think that Phil Von Pop has his place, and he's going to be starting for them in a pretty big role. They really like using as many defensive backs as they possibly can. And Phil Von Pop is probably going to be starting at free safety instead of at strong safety where he played. But we'll just have to see how it all shakes out. I do think that if he's not starting at free safety, he's going to be playing in the nickel, and just that's what Pottsville likes to do. So I think we can imagine that happening with Von Pop. And whether I don't think they got the best talent they could have, they still got a guy who is probably better than Brian Allen, who is basically replacing in the starting lineup. They also got Ricky Spider, who I think replaces DeBulldozer very well. He's a younger talent, and DeBulldozer only had 3.5 sacks in 7 games last season. I think they can do better. And Ricky Spider, I don't know if he's going to do that. I think that he has the potential to do that. We'll just have to see what happens. But once again, Ricky Spider was not the best available player on the board. You still had Marco Sala, who is some people's top defensive end. As much as I hate to say it, Bjorn Kobbeldick was also on there, and he was rated as a gold. I don't think he should have been. But, there were better players on the field once again, but they just get passed up. And I think this is Dave looking at something else that people were missing. I don't know what that is, but for some reason those were his picks, and a little bit off the beaten path, but we'll just have to see what they can put together. Other draft picks include Javier Vasquez at fullback. He's going to be a gold fullback, which, depending on how much you use them, should be a very interesting thing to watch play out. And then you also have what I think could be one of the most interesting camp battles, Walt Davis White versus Blake Sellers. Of course, Blake Sellers was not performing that well last season. He bounced around to a couple teams, and he's back in Pottsville. And he is right now competing with Walt Davis White to see who's going to be starting opposite Jamison Bloodfeaster on that Pottsville linebacker core, and maybe Hacksaw Blade gets in there as well. But I just wanted to point out that Blake Sellers may lose his job to a guy who was drafted very late in the draft. This was a guy that was drafted in the 4th round, pick 13 in the 4th round, so basically halfway through. And Blake Sellers might be losing his shine even more than it already was right there. Overall, Pottsville did get good value with their picks. They didn't reach for anybody that they didn't have to. However, of the guys that they got, I think they could have gotten more talented prospects, but they did get good enough players. So I'm not going to harp on it too much, but I don't think anything from this Pottsville draft has changed how I feel about them going forward. Junior Samples would be the guy to do that, but even with him, I still feel like this is the same Pottsville that we've been seeing for the last couple of years. And what do they need to get over the hump? I'm not sure yet, but with Gary, he needs to do better than he's been doing, and I think that's the key here. And so we reach the final team in the East, and that is the DC Tribe. Now, the DC Tribe have gone through a lot this past couple weeks. Their owner left the league for personal reasons. We wish him well. But they left us in the palms of the league office to get these picks in for DC. I was not around, so I was not given the opportunity to talk with the league office about what I think that the DC Tribe should be drafting. I don't know who made the selections, but we will be talking about them, and I don't think they did very well. So the first pick that the league made for DC was quarterback Vaughn Jones. Now, here's the deal. 2 quarterbacks had already gone off the board. I think that whoever made the decision decided that they were going to draft quarterback no matter what. And unfortunately, that left them in a pickle. If they had known ahead of time, if they had studied ahead of time, they would have known that the rumor mill definitely had Calgary taking King Jackson, and they also had Vermont taking Rudy Rohan. Now, while there was some question marks over whether Rudy was going to Vermont, it definitely was likely. So just looking at the Vaughn Jones pick on its own, you're taking the 3rd player available at a certain position. And now, of course, Vaughn Jones is a silver. Now, Vaughn Jones, he did not perform very well, and he really only got bailed out because of the system he was in. It was a downfield throwing system. They were just chucking the ball all the way. He had great receivers to back him up, Junior Samples being one of them, but it was basically throw the ball down the field, make a completion, and that will be how you move the ball down. They did not do a lot of middle yards. You see this a lot in the college level, to where it's a vertical passing offense, and that is what Vaughn Jones was. So I think you get a system quarterback at number 10, so you really have to play into his strengths, and he won't have those same strengths now that he's not playing as a gold quarterback. Because, of course, being rated at silver, you can only do so much. So I think that that is definitely the first strike against them. Second thing, they traded up for this pick. Before the owner moved on, they traded up 1 spot to get into the gold round. Now, people were saying, oh yeah, he was going to draft a quarterback. I think it was very clear. If you're moving up 1 spot, then you know where the gold is. You're not going to take a silver player. You're going to take a gold player. And I think that was very clear. What did they not have? They did not have a strong safety. They had 1 safety on the roster coming into this draft, and that was a bronze safety. If you draft a gold safety and then come back, and I know you're not going to get a top-level quarterback, but maybe you can use the trade market. Maybe you see somebody like the Calgary Clash, who now have a silver backup quarterback, and you can trade for that guy. You could also look in free agency and find a player that is equally as good as Vaughn Jones. Who is that player? DeAndre Washington. Now, DeAndre Washington and Vaughn Jones are very similar players. They're scramble builds for APF. Those don't work, unfortunately. As much as I've tried, it does not help these players get better. So, you are basically signing up for a silver build. And yes, Vaughn Jones comes in with athletic freak and laser arm, which are better than you're getting from DeAndre Washington. But if you're expecting Vaughn Jones to be your QB of the future, I think you're very wrong on that. I do not think that Vaughn Jones is the guy you should be tying your horse to, especially with how your roster looks. So, what do? You sign DeAndre Washington, you trade for Deshaun Harrison, who you know they're going to give up for free, and you plug him in as a stopgap quarterback to get you to next season. You're probably going to get similar, if not better, results from that silver quarterback. And you don't have to hold on to him for 3 years, which is what you're going to have to do with Vaughn Jones, or cut him and take a huge penalty, or trade him to someone who's dumber than you, which I just don't see a world where Vaughn Jones is a good option here in this spot. Maybe you can get him to gold. Maybe. I don't know how that's possible with the roster you have, but let's say that happens. So you're getting a gold quarterback who's on the cheap. That's only going to last you so long, and I still don't even think that's going to help you. But let's look at who he's going to be throwing to. Broderick McFadden is a solid number 2 receiver. He is currently their number 1. After him, it's Jeffrey Macklin and Brody Slayman. If you wanted to, you could have set up your silver quarterback with a gold wide receiver. They could have drafted a gold wide receiver. Moby Brown was still on the board, and yes, that's their only gold receiver. But that was still a gold player. If you weren't going to take a strong safety because you didn't see the value, then take a gold wide receiver who is going to be helping your silver quarterback for this year and your quarterback in the future. And if you wanted to run with a bronze, you could get someone who could play that position. You had Mac Anthony, who, while he was a bronze, was a primary player. So you would have that third ability. And he's a pretty solid build. Heck, Memphis is taking him because they think they can use him. So Vaughn Jones was absolutely not the best pick here. If you could have traded down, maybe, you could have taken him in the silver rounds, picked up some picks for next year or this year, and build that way. You did not need to take him at that spot. The league should have seen that trade and known that he was taking a gold and let it happen. I do not know why they made this pick. This was a stupid decision, and that is not a decision that I would have made. Because let's look at their other 2 draft picks, Emmett Pierce and Josh Clayton. Now, Emmett Pierce was a solid prospect and probably should have gone a lot higher than he did. Now he's starting for day 1 in DC as a bronze. This could have been Emmett Pierce at number 8, or number 10, and that could have been a gold player. They do not have that opportunity, and they are going to get burned by a lot of teams. They have 2 silver corners and 2 bronze safeties. That is what they are working with. And they have the cap space. It's not like they didn't have cap space. They have $43 million before, and they have a couple players to sign, but that's going to be copper players. That's 3 copper players. They have so much cap that they're not able to use because we didn't spend on a gold player. So these other draft picks, I think, are moot. I think that this was the absolute worst pick they could have made at number 10. And then they didn't set themselves up well because now they're just drafting guys who should be depth players, but instead are starting day 1. And maybe you get a progression out of them. But even if you do, you only have Evan Pierce for 1 more year, and you have Josh Clayton. You lose him after this season. So this was not thought ahead. They just saw, quarterback, got to get a quarterback, and they didn't look at anything else on the roster, and they just tanked what could have been a good way to rebuild this team. If we complained about the guy who we fired, we should have done a better job than he would have done, because he wouldn't have done this. That is absolutely the stupidest move that we could have made in this position. And we had a pretty decent amount of time to do it. We had a couple days. So I am very disappointed in the league office, and I think DC, whoever DC's owner is next, is not set up well for the future at all. So that was the East Division. We had the 4 teams. Let's move on to the Central, and we are going to go straight into it with the Lincoln Spiders. Now look at the Lincoln Spiders. They did something that I think a lot of people were surprised by. They took King Washington at running back. Now, King Washington had a very solid running average. He just doesn't have a big of a sample size as some of these other guys. He ran for 4.6 yards per carry, but that was That was only good enough for fourth in rushing yards, just getting over James Clyne and Josh Copeland. I much would have rather had Capaldi Romano or Rudy Barrett in this spot. However, I don't think it's the worst play in the world. You know that King Washington didn't get as many opportunities. He did have a rough game against Tucson, but, that's just part of how it goes. Sometimes in these games, we saw that from Kalea Milani a lot, where he'll have a good game and then he'll disappear. So all things considered, I'm not going to say that this was a bad pick by the Lincoln Spiders. I just think they could have done a little bit better talent-wise. Maybe you get more out of him as a primary player, but we'll have to see what unfolds. You also drafted Luther Chris, which is a defensive tackle. I'm not sure you needed that in that spot. You already have a great player in Oscar Pride, and I think that'll be he'll be good at the defensive line once again. But I'm not going to complain if they decide to run a 4-3 defense. I think that would, if that's the only reason that this would make sense. But we'll just have to see what they come up with. And then they grab Guy Clausen, who's going to be their wide receiver 3. I think that was a solid pickup. They needed to improve at that position. So get a guy who can play alongside Marlon Marshall and Dave Beener. Those are you're vastly improving from what you had last season. Dave Beener, he did surprise a lot, but Drake Bell was asked to be that guy for them for a lot of the year, and he did not produce. Bull McRae, he did not produce either. He was below 10 yards per reception. So giving Dave Beener somebody to work with, having that be Marlon Marshall, who they traded for, and getting Guy Clausen as well. I think that this is a much improved wide receiving core, and I think that that'll really set them up for success with Jamie Spencer. They also picked up Cody Morris, who's going to be battling with the veteran Eric Fisher at safety. Of course, Eric Fisher is a progressed silver, so they could afford to draft a silver. We'll just have to see how that all shakes out. Whoever doesn't win that is probably going to be playing a lot at nickel, which I would expect from that. And that'll still be a guy that gets a lot of playing time. You pick up a lot of offensive linemen. You get Jet Robertson, who's going to be a silver for them. You got Del Jones and James Smith, also good offensive linemen. And then you get Vita Boudreau, who's going to be a gold fullback. So overall, on the whole, I think they're ready to run the ball. I think they're going to be able to rely on King Washington. They got a good offensive line now to back him up. And you're also rocking with Jamie Spencer at quarterback, so you need a few receivers. They don't have a gold receiver, which I'm a little bit concerned about. Usually the best offenses at least have one, but they still have 3 solid guys that I think at least one of them could progress next year. And if it's Guy Clausen, you have him for 2 years as a cheap gold option. So I think that would be a really, really good play if that's what they're able to do. And they do have a solid defense as well. So I think Lincoln is on the up, and we could see them in an actual play-in scenario and not the play-in that we got this last year. I think that we could see Lincoln be a sleeper team and sneak their way into the playoffs and maybe make an upset or two. And now we go on to the Des Moines Corn Kings, a team that has decided that trading starting quarterbacks is fun. I can't even keep track of how many guys they went in and out of before landing on who is their current starter, Terrence Hudnall. We'll see if that holds till the season's end. But let's go through their draft class. There is the one thing that I would be concerned about. There is no roster chemistry on this squad. Everybody's in and out. They just picked up Brian Bennett out of nowhere as their new receiver 1. They got a bunch of guys that were not here last season, and we'll have to see how they contribute. But they've got a lot of holes that I'm a little bit concerned about. But let's try to keep it positive with their first pick. They picked up Justin Reeside, who I think is a talented player. They're going to get him at silver. And he's going to be competing with Ricky Rivera, who is the incumbent tight end for them. Justin Reeside is a primary player, so he's going to have that extra trait. So I think he probably ends up winning that battle. But we'll just have to see how much they're able to use him and if it was worth it. Because they did need a linebacker, I think, at least in my opinion. They have one silver linebacker out of their six that they have right now. Of course, you can get talent out of bronze and even copper inside linebacker. Of course, you can get talent out of bronze linebackers. I got a lot out of my copper linebacker, Josiah Walker, and I think that he has an opportunity to compete for that starting job and really should be after the performances he's been putting in the last couple years. But they only have one silver outside linebacker, and that's Hank Hendricks. They spent $3.5 million to get him. But they could have not spent anything and got one in this draft, and they decided against that, instead going with a tight end at a position that they didn't really need. And yeah, I know that's your assistant GM. You got to make that pick. But you didn't. You could have done something else, and they just decided not to do that. So we'll have to see if Justin Reeside is able to break out and be a tight end that a lot of people can rely on. Then that'll be a different thing. But right now, I don't love the pick in that spot. I think it's still a good talent, but we'll have to see. They pick up Johnny Sullivan, who's going to be a backup for them, or actually he'll be starting at outside linebacker rather than inside where he played. Johnny Sullivan, I don't have a lot to say on him because he wasn't a guy that really stood out on the draft board. He wasn't a guy who was leading in anything. He was just kind of a quiet player. So I don't really think he was worth the pick in that position. But, he did get 16 tackles in his 6 Rise League games, so that's not the worst. Even though he wasn't ranked very highly an inside linebacker, he was actually the lowest rated inside linebacker and was drafted in front of Bobby Law, Steven Jefferson, who were rated higher than him by a lot. I don't know. I still think that that's a decent enough pickup, and it was a late round pick, so nothing to be worried about. Then we get to J.W. Hart, which is a guy that I really wish I could have gotten. I really wish that I had gotten J.W. Hart in the 4th round, but Des Moines got to him a little bit before me. J.W. Hart, I believe he's going to be playing a lot for Des Moines. He's going to be competing with Semper Fidelis and a couple other players to be playing in that nickel and dime position. We'll see how everything shakes out come week 1. We'll probably see him in the Omaha Invitational, and we'll see him playing, and we'll see how he performs. In the 5th round, they picked up Ronaldo Segu with their first of their 5th round picks, and then they were able to trade him to Jamaica, which was not something I thought was going to happen. I'm not really sure why that went down, but they were able to get Brian Bennett, who is very underrated and I think could be one of the best receivers of all time. Now that he's playing in Des Moines, a team that's going to be watched a lot, I think you're going to see Brian Bennett really show out. Trading what ends up being a future 4th and a 5th for Brian Bennett is absolutely insane. I don't know how they pulled it off, but if getting Ronald Segu was the way to do Ronaldo Segu, if that was the way to do it, then they really lucked out there. They were also able to pick up a couple of offensive linemen. They get Cornelius Stalk, A.A. Ron Jacklin, Eric Kyle, Cameron Curtis at fullback, Poppy Manafort at kicker, and DJ Alberga at cornerback, another guy that's going to be competing for that nickel and dime positions. These are all good depth pieces. They just needed to sign some offensive linemen, so they got some in this draft. And Poppy Manafort, I think that could be a game changer for Des Moines. They decided to go and get themselves a gold kicker, and I think that having that Mr. Reliable trait, the 99 in both, is going to make Poppy Manafort impossible to stop. And if we do end up moving to a different game, having 99 kick power and kick accuracy is going to be legendary. So overall, Des Moines, I think, did a decent job of what they had. I think they overthought it at tight end, and that cost them at the linebacker spot. But they did get one of the best receivers in the game, and even though they did trade a bunch of quarterbacks out, they did get Terrence Hudnall, who, while he's probably not the best quarterback in the world, he is solid enough, and I think he could do a really good job with the talent that's around him here. So I think that Des Moines is going to take a step back, but they're still going to be right up there, and they're going to be competing to possibly make a playoff run. And we'll see if they can rely on that defense that has really been the key for them with Noah Underhill Jr. They were able to pick up Jimmy Knight as well, Ezra Swift. These are all guys that are really talented and I think could be really good for Des Moines. So now we have Santa Fe, and for Santa Fe, I'm sorry to say, I don't think that they got better this offseason. If anything, they stayed the same. They didn't really change their strategy based on what they saw last year. They kind of just were okay with where they were. And for that, I don't think they should be talked about that well. They were 3-4 last year. They did have a positive points for, points against, and they did have a really good defense, but they just didn't produce when it mattered the most. And I think that they really should have done more to improve this team. Before we get into their draft, they have still Julio Reyes at quarterback, Nolan Pierce at running back, and those two guys are solid, but I think you could have improved on them at some point along the line. Kevin Calcutta, I think, is a great number 2 receiver, but I would struggle to say that they did better at wide receiver, and here's why. Because they basically traded out James Woodson for Ryan Roosevelt. Now, Ryan Roosevelt is a solid 1,000-yard receiver, but the way James Woodson plays makes it really just a really great tight end. So they're replacing him with their first-round pick, Benji Vanderhuge. So that's big shoes to step in for the kid. And I think that at 6'7", 250, and his name being Vanderhuge, he could definitely do it. But I don't know if I like the receiving core better now with Roosevelt over James Woodson and Benji Vanderhuge being a guy that Julio Reyes is going to be targeting a lot. I do like the player, but I worry a little bit if he's the number 2 receiver in all practicality. Now, Max Dongle, that was a great pick. He was the best player available at a position of need, and that's your outside linebacker. They desperately needed somebody to play out there and make a huge impact, and Max Dongle is going to be that guy for them. And this defense, which was very good, they did have trouble stopping the run, and I think Max Dongle, he does have run coverage bonus and run reader, so if you're looking for someone to do that, he is going to be able to do that for sure. And they also pick up a solid piece in Mahir Monsoon. They get another silver wide receiver. They're replacing J.J. Bryant with that spot, and I think he'll be able to play better than J.J. Bryant. So we'll see. He's also a primary player, so I expect him to, if he's not the number 2 receiver, to get a lot of playing time with Kevin Calcutta. So we'll see how that all shakes out, but I do think that they are doing good work. They kept their tiers the same, and I think they could have done more stuff to do better. They also went ahead and drafted Zane Holdorf. He's a punter. I'm not going to talk much more about that. But Santa Fe needed a star player. Ryan Roosevelt is supposed to be that star player. Derek Jenko is probably also that star player. So we'll see if those guys can do a lot. Chaz Brown, Bam Johnson on the defensive line. Those are your stars. Now, do those guys come out and play like stars? We'll have to see. But I feel like they could have used 1 or 2 more big-time stars on this team somewhere. I don't know how you get it. I don't know how many assets they had this season. But I feel like they could have done just a little bit more with what they had. So last up in the Central region is the Louisiana Steamers. I think this was a good pickup of this trade that we were talking about earlier. This trade with Charleston, trading out. They get 2 first-round picks, and they only had to give up the first and second picks in the first round. So I think that they did a good job with this trade, and I think they got really talented players out of it. At number 3, they pick up Yayo Montana. Now, there was a lot of discussion over whether they should draft a wide receiver or a cornerback here. I think that getting, as I've looked at it more, I think that this was a great pickup. They needed a wide receiver too, desperately. And whether that is a silver or a gold, I think that Louisiana, trading away Richmond Webb, their running back, really said, we are going to have to go in all on wide receiver. And Yayo Montana was that guy. He was a touchdown machine in the Rise League. He had a touchdown for every game, and nobody else can say that. And you're going to have him locked in for a couple of years, so he's going to have all of this. He's going to be that guy, and I think that him and Leighton Blue is going to be really scary, because Leighton Blue is one of the best in the game. Don't get it twisted. They also picked up A.J. Jackson in the first round. And while A.J. Jackson, I think he was the best cornerback, this was another need. Could you pick up a guy to replace Doug Barney? Doug Barney's production wasn't that great last year, so A.J. Jackson, can he be better than what Doug Barney gave you at a cheaper price? Then they go after Mo Joseph. Now, the problem with this pick is it was in the third round. They get him at a bronze level. I think that's a waste. You try to trade out of that pick. You try to get more value. Either you trade with someone, get yourself a fourth round pick and get some other value next season, or you get a season 3 third round pick for that pick. It was available. There were people that wanted to do it, but instead they go ahead and draft a player and take him down a level. I don't love that, but he's still a good player, value-wise. But Capaldi Romano, this is a guy that I really wish he was that third round pick, because he could have competed with Flash Hendricks. If he's a silver, I say he outplays him, because Flash Hendricks has never shown that he can be a quality running back in this league. And Capaldi Romano, for my money, was the best running back in the league. He averaged 4 yards a carry, and he had enough carries to where I can say that he really did it well. And he was also right up there in touchdowns. The only reason that people liked Malaya more was because he had so many more carries than everybody else. And that's how he was able to get those yards. Capaldi Romano, he was breaking the tackles. That's what he did. He was the Trey Tucker of this season. He had 11 broken tackles. And a guy like King Washington, he only had 2. He had 2 broken tackles. And that's who Lincoln took. They could have taken Capaldi. But as a bronze, I don't know how much there is there. I still think he outplays Flash, because Flash has just been bad every time people give him an opportunity. But we'll just have to see what happens. I think that he could be a decent role player if Flash Hendricks is not up to snuff. And then we go to Mike Burzdick, who was the tight end 2, I think, in this class. And this was the wrong team for him to go to. They don't need a tight end. And I think people really passed up on him. Obviously, Reside went ahead of him. And that was for a reason, as we know. But I really think Burzdick deserved better than going the first pick of the 5th round, and to a team that's probably not going to play him that much, as he is currently listed as the number 3 tight end. He will be competing with Donald Hills, who is their current number 2, but regardless of whether he's 2 or 3, Mike Coco is an absolute star at the tight end position. I don't see a place for Mike Burzdick besides as a backup at this point in his career. Maybe on another team he could do something, as we saw from my own Jackson Krabs. You can get a bronze tight end to progress, but it won't be with Louisiana unless Mike Coco goes down. And they also pick up depth with Curtis Cameron. He will be playing alongside Brian Bunkley to see who's going to get more playing time there. Bob Owens, after he gets moved out of the starting lineup from regressing to bronze, I assume he'll be also competing for that nickel position, but we'll just have to see. So that is my review of the first 2 divisions. I wanted to get through more, but my voice is starting to get hoarse, so we're just going to stop for now, and I will come back to you later on and go through the rest of the draft, and maybe we'll give you some more updates depending on what's going on and when I get back to this project. But thank you so much for listening, and hopefully you enjoyed this show. Hopefully you didn't hate my takes too much. This has been WFA Uncut. Stay tuned for more episodes, and stay hot, WFA. Stay hot.